If you look weak, you are weak. When you go searching for your clients, you've already handed over control. If you go to them with your hat in your hand and say, please give me some work, then they haven't come to you because they want you. They've come to you because you're possibly cheaper than the other alternative. But if you go through a pitch process where you're quoted against two other people, or if they've come to you, previous work you've done or previous relationships, then you're already in a position of respect.
Why do a developer come to you compared to others?
A guarantee of outcome. Guarantee of quality control. And the more the buyer can see what they're buying, the more likely they are to buy it.
What is your offer to those developers?
What we do is, it's called visual branding. So from our point of view, it's the predominant and major thing that does marketability. Trust mechanism with the client is probably, I would describe, the most important factor, quality. And if you go into it being told what to do, they're more than likely being told what to do by someone who doesn't know what they're doing, and therefore you end up with substandard outcomes. There's no such thing as a CGI. It might be generated by a computer, but the reality of that is that there's always some sort of human intervention that's driving the process, and I think they should all be called HGIs, or human-generated images. I would describe us as a teaching studio. That is, we bring people in at the lower level. We don't really bring a lot of senior people in. We tend to bring them in lower and we train them through the system. If the project isn't as highbrow, then it's an opportunity for a junior person. It's less expensive to keep clients than find new ones.
If you would give an advice to someone who is just starting on their own,
trust yourself and respect yourself, but do the hard yards. In my view, you'd never expect your staff and the people who work for you to do something you're not willing to do yourself, because otherwise that respect goes very quickly.
this advice applies to everyone.
Yeah.
Really, it applies for newcomers and also for some experienced people.
If people can feel the confidence, so there's something very consistent with the leaders of studios, is that they all talk well, they sell themselves well. There's a confidence. If it's harder to sell something, then you have to try harder.
Hey everyone, today we have another episode of the Business of ArchViz podcast. The guest today is a very special guest. He is one of the biggest contributors to our industry, and he is one of the very first people who has started a business in this industry. Daniel Flood from Australia. He is going to introduce himself and let you know about his history. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Daniel, please introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Flood. I run a studio called Flood Studio, which is, I guess, head office is in Melbourne, Australia, with offices around the rest of the continent. I've been in the game for 24 years. I've been running the studio formerly known as Flood Slicer for a large percentage of that time. Recently we renamed ourselves Flood Studio, which is maybe why you don't necessarily know the name. So yeah, it's probably enough of an introduction.
Great. You just answered my first question, which is, where did the slicer go?
Oh yeah, and very unusually then I started the company with a woman called Samantha Slicer. So it really was just our two names together, like a law firm. And Sam unfortunately left the business in 2017, or 2016, sorry. And so therefore for 8 years we've kept both names together. We just felt that there was a time for some change. I think a lot of the feeling, I guess, around industry and all industries really is that, we have to shift and change. And so we thought, well, why not have a look at rebranding the company? And part of that was to sort of gain extra interest. And so, yeah, we sliced the slicer off.
Great. Yeah, okay. Now I understand. I thought about something different, but it's all good. If you would summarize the types of clients you have been working with when you started, and how did that change over the years? For example, the types of clients you are working with today, are they the same you have been working with like 10 years before?
I think similar to 10 years ago. I think when we first started, much smaller, there was 3 people working in a room. We were part of a broader company that worked in branding and photography, working with a man named John Collings Photography, and that organisation was called Collings Pigeon. When we were working in that area, we were predominantly working with architects. I think and that's because the commissioning base of the work came from architects in relation to, a couple of pictures, right? So a couple of those hero images of the building. Over time, that changed quite rapidly, actually, with the advent of Flood Slicer. to then start working with developers and brand companies. So the developers, probably director developer now, represents the majority of the work we do.
Okay, okay. And I know you do more than ArchViz. I mean, what you do is not only imagery. It's like 3D animation. You have some sort of like a creative direction that is outside the norm. Um, what is your offer to those developers? Is it like a complete branding for the development? Is it like you are providing them with their marketing assets? If you would explain a little bit what you offer them.
I think the way in which any group of people organises different types of collateral. Now, we might work in things like planning, which is architect driven, but sometimes with the developer. Okay, and that is an obvious sort of structure of how you work. When it comes to answering your question, the way in which the work is commissioned in Australia could either come from brand companies, or it could come from the developer, or it could come from architects. They're the main ones. We do not perform the role of, say, branding the building, and by that I mean giving it a name and giving it a colour and giving it a font. Okay, and that includes sort of the overarching strategy, strategizing the marketing campaigns. And that's deliberate because a lot of our clients would be there for our competitors. We have therefore spent a lot of time putting ourselves and building a position that's somewhere in the middle, which means we are quite in control in many cases of the imagery we make, but it's built around collaboration with brand companies, and quite often informs the brand companies about how they should go about it. So it's having built a lot of respect over a period of time. So people actually come to us, and it's what I call oh God, I've forgotten the name. It's what I called. Sorry, I have to read. Might have to cut this bit because I've forgotten my own. What we do is it's called visual branding in my mind. So what we do is we take the idea of the building form and shape and location, and it is the fundamental difference between one project and another. Calling it something or giving it a color is arbitrary. What is a particular ArchViz project is almost always located in its site, position, time, and all the rest of it in the architecture. So from our point of view, it's the predominant and major thing that does market a building.
Mhm. Okay, okay. I see. I mean, visual branding is something interesting. Um, let's say, I mean, you have already said that developers are your main client segments for now. Are they all over the world, or are they Australia based?
Predominantly Australia, but we work around the world. It's a large percentage in Australia. There's a lot of real estate, I guess, sales. Given the size of Australia in terms of population, there's quite a lot of work. But as I've often said, you can build your own market, and sometimes the better that is. For example, when they used to sell buildings in 2008, they would need 6 pictures. Now they need 50. Okay, and why do they need 50? Because the other project has 50. Okay, and the more that the buyer can see what they're buying, the more likely they are to buy. So over a period of time, I guess there's a sort of image inflation that has gone, which works for us. But that is about doing quality work, and then and because of its average work, it also requires a market that's a little bit difficult at some points, because if it's harder to sell something, then you have to try harder. Okay, and a lot of, and so in our time, there's been about 3 phases where the market has been bad, where they had to try harder. And in one case, during the global financial crisis in about 2008-9, we went from doing 4 pictures, or 6 or 8 or something, and then they were building display suites, and they were spending $1 million, $2 million on display suites, and they thought they'd save money by doing more renders. So often these sorts of effects and ways in which they look at the market changes. Okay, so that is the fundamental difference, I guess, over time, and how the business grew, and also how the industry grew in Australia. So, and we're not the only ones responsible for that. There are some brand companies, there are other rendering companies as well, who were a part of that process. We just did the first 13 years. That's all. Okay.
Perfect, perfect. I mean, the term image inflation, that's a perfect term and really great. Um, So we talked about the client segment. We talked about, um, I would say, the market. It's mainly Australia. You do work internationally, but like it's different. It's not always the case.
Yeah, predominantly it's been Southeast Asia and Middle East. Um, we have, and we've done some work in Europe, but really that's it. But we haven't necessarily built the business through new business and advocating and cold calling or anything along those lines. It's always been word of mouth. Okay. And I've always tended to do what was before me. And I probably got to the point around about 8 years ago or 9 years ago that I was happy with the size. And the reason why the size mattered was not about making money. The size mattered is about having capacity to do the things you want to do. So having roughly 50 people meant that we have enough different types of people there to do most film productions, for example, and that allowed it to be in house. So a lot of that for me became the comfortable size.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, so now you are in a position, I mean, since 8 years, you just get inquiries, and there is no, I would say, client acquisition activities, or I would say networking.
Well, I think it's changed a little bit now. There's more of a global aspect to it, and a way a number of companies are operating. So there is an acquisition process going on at their end. So yes, we have begun the idea of, and I think that it's not just that. There are other technologies and things. The speed of how you put things together, the let's call it the threat of AI equals the idea that you're probably going to need more projects around the world to remain sustainable at the same level. So yeah, there's a definite idea that that globalized push is sort of happening for all sides, and yeah, I guess at the moment, I mean that's why I'm sitting in London now, where we're moving around and having a look and then seeing what's out there. Obviously, I was just talking to D2, but I guess I use that as a reason or excuse to go and see what's happening. Yeah.
I remember like you had an interview with Ronan Beckerman in the State of Art Academy days, and you told him one sentence. It like AI at that time, 4 years ago, it was like in the start. There was something called AI, and it's happening. And you shared your opinion with him about the tools that you see that the industry did not change a lot. There are some new plugins, some new features. And do you have the same direction now with AI?
Well, I think it's probably tuned to the talk I just gave the other day, which is the tools. I mean, yeah, I recall, mate, because that was definitely, and if you recall, I mean, in that talk, I talked about there's no such thing as a CGI, okay, and it might be generated by a computer, but the reality of that is that there's always some sort of human intervention that's driving the process, and I think they should all be called HGIs or human generated images.
HDI.
HGI. Okay. And then I showed that slides where I put up an example of what I call a Conte generated image, which is made out of, crayon, and then another one that's a camera generated image. They're all CGIs. And the reason why I make the distinction is that this idea that the people who tend to pick up the computer and start doing 3D work are very much seen as technologically focused, or tend to look at the tools as the means and an outcome, whereas the ones that have flown tend to not think of the tool as the be all and end all of the process. Okay, the tool is just the tool, and you might use digital cameras, you might use helicopters, you might use that, you might use different sets of people, you might use film cameras, you might use all these things, and those things together is what, when you say there's a different creative direction, it's because we're thinking about all a whole different sets of tools. Now, to actually answer your question, do I think it's changed? Yes. I changed that script from the one I gave in SOA, because that particular set of slides that I spoke to yesterday, or indeed last week, was I changed it. I put the word was, and the reason I put the word was is just remember also that all AI related images are all being generated out of what was made by humans. Okay. And then you have this, and effectively it's a series of large data sets that are being reinterpreted through whatever text prompt input is being put in there. The text prompt input will go out of the way, because it always does. It always starts that way. It's like when I was using 3ds Studio 4 pre-Max days, typing, or even AutoCAD, typing them in, which will still do it. And I'm sort of, I sit there and go, we know that interface will shift and change. But part of that is that sifting child. I mean, effectively, we're programming it. So if you understand that that's what AI is, then you understand it is still human generated in terms of the way in which it's interpreted. But everyone's forgetting that they're not forgetting. You know that the direction input could be generated through ChatGPT, then tied into the images, so it all could be self-generating. But I'll say one thing that people don't, and I forgot to mention the other day, is, and the easiest way of saying it, who programmed the data in the first place? And the best way to test that in something like a mid-journey is write attractive blonde woman by the river, and what you get is a very sexy-looking blonde woman with a plunging neckline. If you write brunette by the river, you get a much more, less sexy outcome. Why is that? I have tested. It's happened to me. I actually did a whole set, and that is because who put that information in, or what is the connotation of being blonde in this culture? So from that point of view, you realise, therefore, that there is a whole train of sort of visual knowns that are being trapped in this sort of thing, and will it ever come out again? Or how does that get remedied? You can fix the blonde problem by saying Chanel. When you say blonde, you can fix it any number of ways, but the actual issue at the end of the day is that it's very is what gets you them. It creates the zeitgeist. What you see creates the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist is created by all the imagery you see, all the Instagram things you see, all that sort of stuff. So it's all growing over time, and then that body of knowledge is sort of then generated out and spits out these pictures. So I actually think at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is coming out of human control in a way it hasn't before. Do I think it's a change of tool? Absolutely. Do I think it's that? I mean, as I said, we've used that tool to make storyboards. We've used it to create ideas, but it's almost difficult to get it to be the right aesthetic. And when it comes out, it's then, because it looks final, tends to then, at the moment, structure exact ways of, pretty much copying the image when you actually do it in 3D as well. And I think that's happening in architecture as well, having talked to a whole bunch of architects over the last couple of years. So I think I think overall, yes, the tools are updated. I just think it's not as, it's very hard to know how much change it will be there, because it does depend on how much change there is there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. Um, I mean, being in a position where client come to you, that's a great position. If you would say what are the three things, and we want at the end to take one out of those three things that the client always think about you. Client always think about these three things when it comes to your service.
What are the three things they think?
For example, why do a developer come to you compared to others? I am 100% sure that you are not the cheapest. You are one of the highest level in the industry. So there is a reason that makes people say, I want Flat's work.
I'd say reputation. Okay, that's the first thing. A guarantee of outcome, guarantee of quality control. I think, and that is how we're structured as well. We're structured more like a architecture firm, or more like a brand company with a creative directors. So there is an internal quality assurance, if you like it, and that is fundamental. And flexibility.
Flexibility. Okay.
That's the only way of dealing with various large scale organisations that all require different things. Okay, so in a business management sense, understanding being flexible to work with different designers, different processes, a lot of experience in knowing that the worst thing you can do to then get bad word of mouth is to not want to work with the systems they want to work with and force your own on them. Being flexible is really quite important. Yeah.
Regarding flexibility, how many teams do you have in-house?
I don't. To be honest, it's a very amorphous flow. There's, probably 7 at any one time, or 6, but it's not. It's always changing. It depends on the groups of people. Yeah.
Okay. And if you don't mind sharing, would you walk me through the structure of Flood?
As I said, well, I'm the managing director, majority owner. There are 2 junior partners, one of whom is the DOP, or the cinematographer, who helped build the film department. We have a film department. I mean, that's the main thing. And then the other one, James Orchard, is the executive creative director running much of the Melbourne stills work. We then have heads of each lead artist, if you like, or head of Sydney, which is Lewis Hunt, and then on the other side that we have two smaller studios that are sort of directed from there. So the structure is basically there. Now there is a separate production area, which is the photography, film, that area, and of those people, and like an output colorist, that sort of grading sort of area, and that is separate to the 3D artists, but at the same time integrated because it includes the 3D animators. Okay, so that's it is. So that sort of breaks it down to a large extent, but it's always, again, I've always had longevity because I've built the team around the team. So the strengths of, let's just say I've got a lot of strong leaders, then the hierarchy is probably more rigid, more strong. If there are a lot of people who sort of work together and roll, then it tends to become a little bit more organic. And I've probably in an organic phase at the moment.
I see, I see. Yeah, perfect, perfect. Um, there is one thing famous about you, or maybe you have mentioned somewhere, and it's like somehow popping every time I ask about Daniel Flood, which is John Collings. Okay, would you tell me like what was the biggest thing you got, what you were influenced by when you were working together?
I think, look, it's just that the history of photography in relation to knowing you were associated. I mean, he started work as a more of a fashion. He was an architecture student who then became a fashion photographer. But then all of his friends became architects. He says this himself. He became, leaders of the field. So then he was doing majority architectural photography, and he always says things like, I studied under Ansel Adams for a day or something, or he always says that. But what he was a photographer, and he effectively was the most respected architectural photographer in Australia, and everyone knew who he was. And over time now, I mean, obviously that was 25 years ago. He still has that respect. He's still working. He's still around. Yeah. So he must be cracking 80 now. But when I graduated from architecture in '99, he was a name. So when I first started working there, he had a digital department, and that's what Flood Studio was born out of, his digital thing. And he'd started, doing renders, if you like, by taking photos of physical models and then compositing them, and then rephotographing them, and then using Photoshop to put the photos together. So that's how far back it fully goes. It goes way back into the early '90s, in actual fact.
Interesting.
So that department, if you like, of his work, when I came in 2000, a couple of years later, I took it over, and then built from there. So that means working with him, understanding, learning the technical side of photography, even back in the days when it was shot on tranny, not digitally. And my first film jobs were shot on film because that's how far back it goes. By the way, that's the other thing with tools. People often talk about digital tools updating, but those of us who've been around long enough, have actually gone through the transition of cameras, and all those things have changed dramatically over that period of time. The processes of how you convert photography into digital things is now infinitely faster, but has lost some of the graininess and naturalness of some of the formats that it's being shot on. There's a whole bunch of things that, so if you go back far enough, you can see. So I guess working with him meant, and this is the funny thing, if you go onto our website, and we do keep it that way, go into the work section and then run a filter for, say, 1999, and it'll show you the renders and the images that we did. It's actually a database of work going all the way back for 25 years. And what you'll see there is the render only stuff is sort of terrible and prehistoric almost. But when you look at the montage and the photography approach, it hasn't changed that much. Okay, in a quality sense, if you go back to 2003 to that 4. So a lot of that is the learning that sort of aesthetically makes you learn how to work within the bounds of 3D, because your aesthetic changes as you understand the real world scenarios. And most of the 3D effects that we put in play are built to simulate real world conditions. And often you say, well, why are we adding lens effects? I mean, what's the point? Well, why am I adding a depth blue? Your eye doesn't depth blue. So it's all about simulation of imperfection, really, and it's. But when you understand the source of where that imperfection lies, you're in a better place to actually simulate it, and that is that's what happens with a lot of, say, the montage work we do over the years.
Yeah, I got. Um, I would like to go back to the clients and their issues. So let's say you got a contact from a developer and they have some sort of an ask about, let's say, visual branding, like what you as you name it. Do you have a qualification process just to see, is it the type of work I want to do, or is this the type of clients I'm happy to work with?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think there's some ethical concerns about who you talk to. I think, but there's also, you know, whether or not, you know, the aspirations of the work are ones that are sort of are at the level we want it to be. We're also not that. I would describe us as not. I don't think we should be judgmental about people's content. To be honest, unless it's obviously sexist or horrible or something like that. What I mean is, if it's a building and its architectural qualities aren't at the level that, say, others would find good, I personally find the challenge of making that look good a lot more difficult than taking the best building in the world and making that look good, because that's really easy. Okay, so there's different aspirations in work. So I think, and not only that, there's always, we are effectively a teaching. I would describe us as a teaching studio. That is, we bring people in at the lower level. We don't really bring a lot of senior people in. We tend to bring them in lower and we train them through the system. And effectively, which is why if you look around the industry and in other firms around Australia specifically, there are a number of people that I've trained that are either running other studios or started their own, and all those sorts of, and that is because we train. And I'm not sure, I know I'm digressing, but it's an important point. So many places just want them to land and do it their way or just start working. In our case, it's always been, well, work within the system and then learn and then grow. Okay, and that is sort of how I like to think everyone feels it is to Flood Studio.
Yeah, okay. This is regarding the, I would say, expansion of employees or getting or
Yeah, it
onboarding
is.
new
It's
employees.
but it is to running a studio. One of the main tasks, human resources, is probably the time-consuming part of it. I mean, it's straight out the
Absolutely.
keeping people interested, especially creatives. I often joke that if I was running a team of accountants, it'd be a lot easier. Okay, it's they do their numbers and go, whereas creatives tend to have very different wants and needs from each other.
Absolutely.
So from
Absolutely.
that
Absolutely.
point of view, it's always about making sure there's aspiration. So the reason why it's answering your question is, if the project isn't as highbrow, then it's an opportunity for a junior person to work on. Okay, and that's sort of how I've always looked at it. The more advanced, difficult ones, obviously, run through the more senior staff, but it gives you, if you've got verticality in types of project, then you have a more interest for a series of creatives to work with it. It's we want difference. It's sort of fundamental.
Okay. Perfect. Do you think that you might make your academy in Australia somewhere?
Uh, I would, it would require me to do some work. I would have to go and organise and do that stuff. And look, it's been suggested a few times. But as anyone who's ever worked with me or for me will tell you, I'm very ad hoc. So I'd have to have structure to do that. I tend to, as I said, if the project is different, that's the learning. It's explain. I really do like to explain the whys of every discussion, every reason to those that are new, or to be honest, even people who are 10-year veterans come across things they haven't seen before. It's very rare that I come across something I haven't seen before. It's a long time. But when it does, and even then, maybe that's actually part of being the business runner or owner, is how do I navigate the difficulty? Okay. That makes that part of the job more interesting for me. It does, because it's just, otherwise it'd just be check zero. That's the accounting software, and tick to make sure the bottom line's right. But it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah. What I meant is making your own academy. I mean, like without like state of art academy. You see, it's like Australia based.
Yeah, I understand, and that's what I'm saying. I'd have to have the time. That's what I mean. I'd have to be able to do.
Ah, you need to have that time. Yeah,
So
I get
that,
the point. Yeah.
and it's almost like I feel like I've done it anyway. And I mean, really, it's there's a benefit to that because the new people you're training are nowhere near as expensive as the experienced ones. Okay, so we don't offshore any of the work. We don't send any work to Europe and to other companies, to the Philippines or China or anywhere.
Mm,
All the work is done localized, and that is part of that cost you're talking about. But it's also the quality assurance. And by the way, when I
mm.
say that, I think the last time I counted the amount of nationalities that work in Australia for us, it's roughly 20.
20 nationality.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So it doesn't mean it's not diverse. I mean, I think very diverse.
It is diverse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, sometimes it's
Yeah.
more. I think there's 4 Brazilians at the moment, all the way over in Australia. A number
Hmm.
of Ukrainians, like a lot of places. A couple Polish, a couple of, whole list of various places they come from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that to me is also makes it interesting, and that's without having to go overseas to drag them in. Okay, it's and you know,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this means if anyone is listening and has the aspiration to work with you, are they I mean, do you seek talent for now?
do I seek talent right now? Not right now, but I think there's always
Mm,
open. I mean, I think people apply who look like they have the wherewithal, who have the right folio and things. Are always willing to do it.
mm,
There is a cost associated. The visa process in Australia is not exactly. They don't
yeah.
make it simpler. There's been a large amount of immigration, and then some of the rules are getting a bit more sort of strict. But
Mm,
but I think at the same time,
mm,
am I? Are we always open to that? Yeah, we are. So people apply, and often it's enough just to put a job ad out and then have people who are in Australia from various backgrounds.
mm.
Oddly enough,
Yeah.
there's not a huge amount of, let's call it, the traditional Australian, the Anglo-Saxon Australian, like myself. Not a
Mm,
huge amount of people applying for jobs. It seems like
yeah.
a very broad aspect sort of career, and I'm not 100% certain why, but that is why.
Mhm. Okay. Um, so you started the company in 2000, you said, right?
The company, the
Around.
actual entity as is now, is 2006. So that's only 18 years ago. But yeah, but it is the advent of one that started in 1999 and 1998. So it's,
Okay.
it's just.
Let's start from 1998 until today.
Mhm.
Okay. Could you walk me through the tipping points? I mean, the points where you had the change, either downsizing or changing, evolving.
I've never actually downsized.
You have never.
So
Okay.
no, so and I mean in the sense that um, it it was traditionally, as I said earlier, there was two to three people to begin with. When Flood Slicer brand name came, so this is the other side of the John Collings thing, is John Collings as the photographer was known for his photography, and as a brand goes, what was, I think, revealed the moment we changed the name to Flood Slicer, suddenly there was a whole bunch of interest of people who didn't think we just did photography.
Hmm.
And that bit of knowledge out there, and it's the same with people like us, as you say earlier, who want to do work outside ArchViz. There's an expectation this is your skill set, and it's very hard to get people to look at it differently. So,
Yeah.
in terms of the tip of the change points, I mean, there was a lot of growth, and it was brand new, I guess. I mean, wasn't that much going on in the year 2000. It grew, so we grew quite rapidly into the GFC. The GFC, in our case, we grew through that period, and a lot about Australia did do that. There was a moment in time where everyone thought it was going to get worse, but China was on the rise. Australia has benefited from that. Australia itself got a lot richer because of it, commodities and things. So over that period of time, it did. But
Hmm.
there was downturns in 2014. I made a loss that year. Okay, and that was the first time. That was 8 years in, 9 years in.
Which year? Sorry.
2014, but it's all local markets, right? So the local markets
Yeah.
ebbed and flowed, and I will also say the global market seems like it. I would say 20 years ago, if Australia's property market was down, then Japan's wasn't. Now they all seem to be down together. Everyone's down at the same time. It seems to be a bit more like that, a lot more integration and globalizing. And so that means is that what you used to do is spread. And by the way, in Australia, it used to feel like that. In Melbourne, it was down while Sydney was up. It was that flexible. Now there's no, that it is all pretty much happening together at those places at different rates. So there was a tipping point in 2008 where we grew. We went from 3 to 16 in 4 years, 3 years, and then went. And people will tell you that there's difficult parts of business, running the business, which is the growth from 4 to 14, 15, and then the one from 18 to the next level up, which is 30, 40. Suddenly you've got a whole bunch of structure you need to put in place to keep it going, and it becomes. And that's why even in Australian terms, the tax wise, anything above 15 people is deemed a medium sized business, because you've got HR, you're legally more responsible in so many ways. You've got all these things suddenly become a lot more problematic, to the point where so many people just don't want to get bigger than that because it's just easier. And that includes things like, what are the rules for firing staff, for example? They become a lot. Okay, redundancies become a lot easier. All those sorts of things happen. The moment you go to 15, redundancies become compulsory. So there is a whole bunch of things like that. And this will obviously differ from one country to another. But from what I'm saying with that is, that happened around about there, 2015. The reason why I say, even through COVID, the Australian government actually really did a good job of, let's call it, subsidising. This type of work is very human centric, so there's a lot of labour cost. So there's a lot of cost in the staff, and so if the government then decides to start handing out, $40,000 or $39,000 per staff member, so they can sit around the house and do nothing while they're in lockdown, then effectively that meant that I didn't have to sort of shed the whole. I would have had to. I mean, there was no work. We went from 100% full to 5% in 2 days. I got the phone call from like 5 different people on the same day. It was obviously something happened and every job stopped. There was 1 or 2 big jobs that kept on going. So, and what it meant is that there was a sort of sustenance. So even then, and the question is what you mean by downsize too. There's ways of downsizing. That is to look around your group of people and say, which of you is the most required and which isn't. Or the other one is let them self-select. And that is, so I have got smaller, but it's usually been by not replacing people when it comes, and it's a slow process. So this can be costly, but I actually think keeping the team together is the most important thing you can do. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, keeping people in this industry is hard.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have 2006, 2008, 2015, and 2020. Those are somehow the tipping points.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we talked about who are your clients, how they changed over time. We talked about if you have some sort of qualification process for the clients, and you really, I really.
I will add one thing. When you go searching for your clients, you've already handed over control. Like if you go to them, if you go to them with your hat in your hand and say, "Please give me some work," then they haven't come to you because they want you. They've come to you because you're possibly cheaper than the other alternative. And that sounds brutal and unfair. And you might, but if you go through a pitch process where you're quoted against 2 other people, or if they've come to you, because of previous work you've done or previous relationships, then you're already in a position of respect. The problem I find, and I'm not sure if this is the case of other industries, but in this one, it's the fundamental reason why the cheaper alternatives don't persist, because the work, and this is the words I used in the talk, the quality of work you do is not just, as the computer systems get more and more similar. Now, everyone used to be a lot more secretive of their methods 15 years ago, but now you don't have to be, because most of those settings are pretty much in the systems themselves. So there's no I'm going to, I made this picture like this for this way or that way. It's a decision. So if there's less of that happening, one of the main guidance is the content you're dealing with, but it's also how much freedom you get. And if you go into it being told what to do, they're more than likely being told what to do by someone who doesn't know what they're doing, and therefore you end up with substandard outcomes, and that is perpetuated. So really, that trust mechanism with the client is probably, I would describe, the most important factor in quality to some extent. It's they have to trust you.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
You know what? I mean, the position of respect. Okay, when, as you said, if you are seeking clients who have already handed over the control, um, the question is, I mean, obviously you have your own history, you have your own quality, you have your own processes. For someone who is starting, who has started 2018 or 17 or maybe 20 or 22, they are still new. I mean, no one knows them. So that's becoming very difficult for them.
Oh no, believe me, I know I get to sit this from a position of strength. I happen to be the right age, right time, just as the technology appeared, and
Mm,
I think, and I understand fully what I'm saying is, if you get your first jobs, make sure they're good. Use those as word of mouth to then persist on.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Do put, projects together that show your ability. Brand yourself properly.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
look like a
that's
freelancer.
absolutely, absolutely.
Out of all the people who've exited my studio, there's a couple who I could name who branded themselves best, and they're the ones that now run studios. It is really important. They look the part, they are the part. And one thing I will say about respect in these things is developers never really get trained, or in most of this industry don't get trained in marketing, so they don't go to university and get told that you should spend 4% of your total turnover to make money. They don't get told this, so they just think marketing is like something they have to bear or pay, and they try and minimize it, so they can keep the amount of concrete they want in the building, right?
Mhm.
It's actually a false economy, and that's them running their business. So, as I say, if you can convince someone that doing 12 renders of a $3 million penthouse will increase their returns by 15%, then who should get the 15%?
Yeah,
And they
that's
can learn this, right? So I think in a lot of, and that is the truth. That's exactly what happens on jobs if they probably make sure their visuals
mm,
are good enough. So it works for the clients. So yeah, that's what I would say in terms of going out now. Obviously, if you're starting out, you need to go and find the work. That is obvious.
yeah,
The question is when do you start just getting repeat work?
just kidding.
Remember the old adage that
Yeah,
it's less expensive to keep clients than find new ones.
mm,
Just remember
that's
that
true.
always.
That's true.
Okay.
You know what? It it is really a great conversation, I would say. Um, I mean, from my side, I don't have any other questions. If you would give one advice to someone who is just starting on their own, and another advice to someone who is like maybe 5 to 10 years in the industry, what would it be?
I think really look at. I mean, at the moment, I'd say it's a little bit. I mean, interesting for the same reasons we ask. It's like where are we going? It's a bit risky at
Mm,
the moment. But I would also say my advice is, just trust yourself. I think most of the issue at the end of the day is and respect yourself.
yeah,
But do the hard yards. Okay. I still do the hard yards, and I've been doing it for 25 years. I often joke around in industry like I'm the first in, last to leave. Okay.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I get told you run the business. I've been doing it for a long time. By now, I should be the one in the Bahamas sitting on a bench while you're all working. That's what it should be, but it's not. Okay.
It doesn't happen. Yeah.
So I think I say this while I'm sitting in London and in the Nobu Hotel. Okay, but anyway,
Mm,
that's funny. But anyway, if you understand my meaning,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
it's you get back what you put in,
Mm, yeah,
and the people who are paying you understand and appreciate that you're doing it. Okay. And in
great,
my view,
great.
you'd never expect your staff and the people who work for you to do something you're not willing to do yourself.
Mm,
Okay, because otherwise that
perfect,
respect
perfect.
goes very quickly.
I think this advice applies to everyone.
Yeah.
Really, like, applies for newcomers and only also for
Yeah.
some experienced people. Um, like one thing you said, trust yourself and respect yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a huge. You see, like I often really find that it's like someone is asking me, "Hey, Anis, I need to want clients," and I sense that they don't really trust themselves. They don't really have this type of respect to the service they are doing. And I find that before even we go to the market, we need to fix internal issues.
Mm.
We cannot just go to someone, let them, hey, I can, maybe I can. I'm not really sure, but like
Yeah,
you see,
confidence, and if people can feel the confidence. So there's something very consistent with the leaders of studios is that they all talk well, they sell themselves well. Um, there's a confidence,
Mhm.
and even if it's pretend confidence, okay.
Yeah,
If you look weak, you are weak. It's really that
yeah,
simple, and
absolutely.
and that is the way in which you need to sort of approach building those relationships.
Amazing, amazing.
Okay. Yeah.
Daniel, I enjoyed this conversation a lot. It's a fantastic conversation, I would say.
Okay.
Um, I'm going to end this conversation. I will stop recording and we will have a quick discussion after that.
Okay.
If you find this conversation insightful, please view it completely or share it. And if you have any questions, please write it below in the comments. Thank you very much, Daniel, for this great conversation.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that everyone knows all the tips you said because I really relate a lot to many things you said. And if you have any questions, also like you can reach out to Daniel somehow on LinkedIn, I think, right?
Yeah.
Where people can reach out to you.
LinkedIn, I'm not afraid of my email address either. It's just daniel.flood at
Yeah.
studio.com. It's pretty easy.
Mhm.
And I think, I've always been open to talking with people in the industry who are interested in finding some things out. I also learn from everyone else. I mean, one of the things about
Perfect.
running from the outset, I never worked for someone else. I mean, I worked for
Mm.
Collings, but I never worked for someone in the 3D industry.
Oh yeah.
So for that reason, everything I've ever known has been either self-taught or gathered from conversations with other leaders at events like the D2 or SOA or any of those things that I've been to.
Mm.
And and that is sort of, well, it's obviously normal, but that is I'm very happy to sort of engage with people if they want to know some things.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.